The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as William stood at his office window, watching the gardeners tend to the roses his grandmother had loved so dearly. The phone call had come at dawn, delivering news that would change everything. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the receiver, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Kate found him there an hour later, still staring out at the garden. She didn't need to ask what had happened. The way his shoulders sagged, the defeat in his posture told her everything. She placed a gentle hand on his back, feeling the tension radiating through his body. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "The doctors say perhaps a few weeks, maybe less," William replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wants to see the children before—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Kate nodded, understanding immediately. They would need to prepare George, Charlotte, and Louis for what was coming. How do you explain to children that someone they love is dying? How do you make them understand that sometimes even queens must say goodbye? The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. William spoke with his father, Charles, coordinating schedules and discussing the inevitable changes that would come. Kate called the children's school, explaining that they would need some time away for family matters. The headmistress was understanding, as she always was when it came to the unique circumstances of their royal pupils. By afternoon, they were in the car heading to Scotland. The children sat quietly in the back seat, sensing the gravity of the situation even if they didn't fully understand it. George, at 10 years old, was beginning to grasp the concept of death, while Charlotte and Louis still saw their great-grandmother as invincible. "Is great-granny very sick?" Charlotte asked, her small voice cutting through the silence. William caught Kate's eye in the rearview mirror. They had agreed to be honest with the children, but age-appropriately so. Kate turned in her seat to face their daughter. "Yes, sweetheart. She's very sick and the doctors can't make her better this time," Kate explained gently. "But she wants to see you all because you make her so happy. Will she get better if we visit her?" Louis piped up, his 6-year-old mind still believing in the power of love to fix everything. "Sometimes, darling, people don't get better, but our love for them never goes away even when they have to leave us," William said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The Scottish countryside rolled past their windows, each mile bringing them closer to a goodbye none of them were ready for. William remembered his own childhood visits to Balmoral, racing through the heather with Harry, their grandmother watching them with amused tolerance. Those carefree days seemed like a lifetime ago. Kate reached over and squeezed his hand. 20 years of marriage had taught her to read his moods, to know when he needed comfort without asking for it. She understood the unique burden he carried, being second in line to the throne, watching his family members grow older while knowing that each loss brought him closer to a crown he wasn't sure he wanted. "Do you remember when she taught Charlotte to curtsy?" Kate asked softly, trying to bring some lightness to the heavy atmosphere. William smiled for the first time that day. Charlotte was so determined to get it perfect. She practiced for weeks, and when she finally did it right, great-granny clapped like she'd just watched the best performance in the world, Kate continued. "She did love an audience," William agreed, his voice warming with the memory. The castle came into view as the sun began to set, its ancient stones glowing golden in the fading light. William felt his chest tighten as they approached. Inside those walls, the woman who had been the backbone of his family, the constant in an ever-changing world, was preparing for her final act. Staff members greeted them at the entrance, their faces grave but welcoming. The children were unusually quiet as they walked through the familiar corridors, their footsteps echoing off the stone floors. Portraits of ancestors watched from the walls, silent witnesses to centuries of royal joys and sorrows. "She's in the drawing room," one of the ladies in waiting informed them quietly. "She's been asking for you all day." William paused outside the door, gathering himself. Kate stood beside him, their children clustered around them like small satellites. This moment would mark the beginning of the end, the start of a farewell that would stretch over the coming weeks. "Ready?" Kate asked, though she knew none of them truly were. William nodded and pushed open the door. The scene that greeted them was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Their beloved matriarch sat in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in a soft tartan blanket. Her face was pale and drawn, but her eyes sparkled with joy at seeing them. "My darling family," she said, her voice weaker than they remembered but still carrying that unmistakable warmth. "Come here, all of you." The children rushed forward, careful not to be too exuberant, somehow understanding that gentleness was needed now. William and Kate followed more slowly, both fighting back tears at the sight of this strong woman made fragile by illness. "Great Granny, we brought you drawings," Charlotte announced, pulling papers from her small backpack. "And I learned a new song at school," Louis added eagerly. "How wonderful," she replied, her face lighting up with genuine delight. "I should love to see and hear everything." As the children settled at her feet, sharing their treasures and stories, William and Kate stood back slightly, watching this precious interaction. They both understood that these moments were gifts, memories being created that would have to last the children a lifetime. The evening passed peacefully, filled with quiet conversation and gentle laughter. As bedtime approached, William knew that this was just the beginning. The coming weeks would test their strength, their unity, and their ability to help their children through one of life's most difficult lessons. But for now they were together, and that was enough. The next morning brought a different kind of silence to Balmoral. William woke early, as had become his habit since childhood. But today the weight of impending loss pressed down on him like a physical thing. He could hear Kate moving quietly in the bathroom, getting ready for another day of careful balance between normalcy and grief. Downstairs, the children were already at breakfast, their grandmother having insisted that routine must continue even in difficult times. George sat reading a book while eating his toast, trying to appear grown up and unaffected. Charlotte picked at her eggs, occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting their great-grandmother to appear for breakfast, as she usually did. Louis hummed quietly to himself, building a small fortress out of his cereal pieces. "Where is Great-Granny?" Louis asked suddenly, his innocent question cutting through the careful atmosphere the adults had been maintaining. Kate exchanged a look with William before answering. "She's having breakfast in her room today, sweetheart. Sometimes when people aren't feeling well, they need to rest more. Can we take her some flowers from the garden?" Charlotte suggested, her face brightening with the idea. "I think she would love that," William said, grateful for his daughter's thoughtfulness. After breakfast, they ventured into the sprawling gardens that had been a source of joy for generations of royals. The Scottish air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of heather and roses. William watched his children explore the flower beds, their earlier solemnity replaced by the natural curiosity of youth. Kate walked beside him, occasionally pointing out flowers to the children or helping them choose the prettiest blooms for their bouquet. She had always been good at finding normalcy in chaos, at creating pockets of peace within the storm of royal life. "Do you remember when Harry fell into the fountain trying to catch a frog?" William asked, gesturing toward the ornate water feature near the rose garden. "And your grandmother didn't scold him at all. She just had someone bring him dry clothes and asked if he'd caught his frog," Kate replied, smiling at the memory she'd heard retold many times. She always understood that being a child should come first, even for future kings, William said quietly. They spent the morning crafting the bouquet, with each child selecting their favorite flowers and explaining why Great-Granny would love them. George chose sturdy delphiniums because they were tall and strong, like the guards at Buckingham Palace. Charlotte picked delicate baby's breath because it reminded her of fairy dust. Louis selected bright yellow sunflowers because they were happy flowers that smiled at the sun. When they returned to the castle, they found several cars parked in the courtyard. William recognized them immediately, family members arriving to pay their respects and spend time with the matriarch while they still could. His Uncle Edward emerged from one car, his face grave but composed. His Aunt Sophie followed, carrying a small gift bag. The next few hours became a delicate dance of family dynamics and shared grief. The adults spoke in hushed tones about practical matters, arrangements, schedules, responsibilities that would need to be managed in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the children moved between the grown-ups, absorbing fragments of conversation and trying to make sense of the adult world of duty and loss. Late in the afternoon, they were finally able to visit with their beloved family member again. She was still in the drawing room, but now she was surrounded by photographs, images spanning decades of family life, public service, and private moments of joy. Her eyes were brighter today, as if the presence of family had given her new energy. "Tell me about school," she said to the children, patting the sofa beside her chair. "What are you learning?" George, always serious, began describing his history lessons about the medieval period. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that showed her own deep knowledge of their family's history. "Did you know," she said to George, "that our family has lived through many changes over the centuries? Kings and queens have faced wars, celebrations, sorrows, and joys. Through it all, we've remained strong because we've stayed together." Charlotte, not to be outdone by her older brother, launched into an explanation of her art project about butterflies. She had been learning about metamorphosis, about how caterpillars transform into beautiful winged creatures. "That's a lovely metaphor, darling," their great-grandmother said softly, her eyes meeting William's over the children's heads. The unspoken understanding passed between them. Sometimes transformation requires letting go of one form to become something new. As the day progressed, William found himself studying his grandmother's face, trying to memorize every detail: the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the gentle way she smoothed Charlotte's hair, the patience with which she listened to Louis's rambling story about his toy dinosaurs. These were the moments he would treasure, the final gifts she was giving them. Kate, meanwhile, was quietly observing the children, watching for signs that they might be overwhelmed or confused. She had brought coloring books and quiet activities, understanding that children needed breaks from the intensity of adult emotions. When Louis began to grow restless, she smoothly suggested a game of hide-and-seek in the castle's long corridors. The evening brought a family dinner, though it was smaller and quieter than the usual boisterous affairs they remembered. Conversations were gentle and reminiscent, filled with stories of better times and shared memories. The children listened to tales of their parents' courtship, of Christmas celebrations and summer holidays, of the small daily moments that make up a family's history. Later, as they tucked the children into bed, Charlotte asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds: "Mama, when great-granny goes to heaven, will she still love us?" Kate sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Love isn't something that ends, sweetheart. Love lives in our hearts forever, even when the person we love can't be with us anymore. Great-granny's love for you will always be part of who you are." "Like how we still love Grandpa even though we never met him?" George asked from his bed across the room. William felt his throat tighten. His father had told the children stories about their grandfather, Prince Philip, helping them feel connected to the grandfather they would never know. "Exactly like that," William managed to say. "Love doesn't need a person to be right there with us. It lives in our memories, in our hearts, and in the way we treat other people." As they turned off the lights and left the children to sleep, William and Kate stood in the hallway for a moment, leaning against each other for support. "How are we going to do this?" Kate whispered. "The same way families have always done it," William replied. "One day at a time, with love and dignity, and by holding on to each other." A week had passed since their arrival at Balmoral, and the rhythm of their days had settled into a pattern of quiet companionship and careful hope. William noticed how his grandmother seemed to rally during the children's visits, her face brightening with genuine joy whenever they entered the room. It was as if their youthful energy gave her strength, even as her body grew weaker. Kate had taken on the role of family coordinator, gently managing schedules and ensuring that everyone had time with their beloved matriarch, while also protecting her from becoming overwhelmed. She understood the delicate balance required. The need for connection weighed against the importance of rest. On this particular morning, William woke to find his grandmother's lady-in-waiting standing quietly by his bedroom door. The woman's expression told him everything before she spoke a word. "She's asking for you, sir. All of you. She says it's time for something important." William felt his stomach drop, but he nodded calmly. He and Kate quickly dressed and gathered the children, who seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Even Louis, usually bubbling with questions, remained quietly thoughtful as they made their way to the drawing room. They found her propped up in her chair by the window, looking frailer than they had ever seen her, but with a clarity in her eyes that was unmistakable. She had requested that certain items be brought to her: photo albums, jewelry boxes, and several wrapped packages that none of them had seen before. "Come, sit with me," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I have some things I want to give you, some stories I want to tell you while I still can." The children gathered around her chair while William and Kate took seats nearby. She opened the first photo album, revealing pictures from decades past: William as a baby, family holidays, formal occasions, and candid moments of joy and laughter. "This is for you, George," she said, handing him a particular photograph. It showed William at about George's age, standing beside his great-grandfather in the same garden where they had picked flowers just days before. "Your papa was very much like you when he was young, thoughtful, serious, but with a wonderful sense of humor hiding underneath." George studied the photograph carefully, seeing himself in his father's young face. "He looks happy," George observed. He was. "And so are you, despite everything that's happening now. Happiness isn't the absence of sadness, my dear boy. It's the ability to find joy even when things are difficult." She turned to Charlotte next, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, simple but beautiful. "This belonged to my mother and her mother before that. It's not the fanciest piece of jewelry, but it's been loved by many strong women. I want you to have it because I see that same strength in you." Charlotte's eyes went wide as the locket was fastened around her neck. She touched it gently, understanding somehow that she was receiving something precious beyond its material value. For Louis, there was a small wooden toy soldier, painted in the traditional red and gold of the Queen's Guard. "This was your grandfather's when he was your age," she explained. "He used to carry it in his pocket everywhere he went. It's not fancy, but it reminded him that even when things were scary or uncertain, there were always people protecting the things that mattered most." Louis clutched the soldier carefully, his small fingers tracing the painted details. Then she turned to William and Kate, her expression growing more serious. From another box, she withdrew 2 items, a leather-bound journal and a simple gold band. "William, this journal contains some thoughts I've written over the years about leadership, about service, about the weight of responsibility that you'll carry someday. Not rules or commands, just reflections from someone who has walked this path before you." William accepted the journal with reverence, feeling the weight of generations in his hands. "And Kate, this ring belonged to William's great-great-grandmother. She was someone who understood that marrying into this family means becoming a guardian of its heart. You've already proven yourself worthy of that role, but I wanted you to have something that connects you to the women who came before you." Kate's eyes filled with tears as the simple band was placed in her palm. It was nothing like her sapphire engagement ring, but somehow it felt more significant. "Now," their grandmother continued, settling back into her chair with visible effort, "I want to tell you some things that are important for you to remember." She spoke for the next hour about duty and love, about the balance between public service and private happiness. She talked about the mistakes she had made and the lessons she had learned, about the joy of watching her family grow and change over the decades. "Being royal isn't about being perfect," she said, her eyes moving from face to face. "It's about trying every day to be worthy of the trust people place in you. It's about remembering that service is a privilege, not a burden." She paused, looking directly at William. "And it's about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. I've held on for as long as I could, but now it's time for the next chapter of our family's story." The children listened solemnly, not understanding everything but sensing the importance of every word. Kate reached over and took William's hand, both of them struggling to maintain composure. As the afternoon wore on, she shared more stories, funny anecdotes about state visits, touching memories of family celebrations, and gentle wisdom about handling the unique challenges of royal life. She spoke about the importance of protecting childhood innocence while preparing children for their future roles. "Promise me," she said as the light began to fade outside the windows, "that you'll let the children be children for as long as possible. There will be time enough for duty and responsibility. For now, let them discover who they are, what they love, what makes them laugh." "We promise," Kate said quietly, speaking for both herself and William. As evening approached, she grew visibly tired, but she insisted on one more family dinner. The meal was quiet but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes from deep love and understanding. Later, as they prepared to say goodnight, she called each child to her chair for a private moment. Whatever she whispered to each of them brought smiles to their faces. Small secrets shared between great-grandmother and great-grandchildren. When the children had gone to bed, she asked William and Kate to stay a little longer. "I want you to know how proud I am," she said simply, "of the parents you've become, of the way you've handled the pressures of public life, of how you've protected your marriage and your family. You're going to face challenges I can't even imagine, but you have everything you need to meet them." As they finally bid her good night, none of them knew it would be for the last time. But somehow it felt like a completion, a circle closing with grace and love. The gifts had been given, the stories told, the love expressed fully and without reservation. Walking back to their rooms, William and Kate felt both emptied and filled, heartbroken by the approaching loss, but grateful for the precious time they had been given to say goodbye properly, with dignity and surrounded by love. The call came at 4:17 in the morning. William was instantly awake, his body somehow knowing before his mind caught up. Kate stirred beside him as he reached for the phone, her hand finding his arm in the darkness. "She's gone," came the gentle voice of the doctor, peacefully in her sleep, just as she would have wanted. William felt the world shift beneath him, even though this moment had been expected for weeks. He hung up the phone and turned to Kate, who was already sitting up, reading his expression in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "When?" Kate asked quietly. "About an hour ago. She was peaceful." They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the reality that the woman who had been the anchor of their family for so many decades was no longer with them. The silence felt different now, heavier with finality. "The children," Kate said eventually. William nodded. They had discussed this moment, had prepared as much as anyone could prepare for telling young children that death had come. But theoretical preparation felt utterly inadequate now that the time had arrived. They decided to let the children sleep until their normal waking time, giving themselves a few hours to begin processing their grief and to prepare for the difficult conversation ahead. William called his father, his voice steady despite the tears that flowed silently down his cheeks. "She was ready," Charles said, his own voice thick with emotion. "She told me yesterday that she was tired, that she felt complete. I think she was just waiting to make sure you and the children had what you needed from her." By 7 o'clock, they could hear the children stirring in their rooms. William and Kate looked at each other, both understanding that this conversation would mark a before and after in their children's lives. The moment they learned that love doesn't prevent loss, that even the strongest people eventually have to say goodbye. They found the children in the breakfast room, their usual morning energy subdued by something they couldn't name but could certainly feel. The staff moved quietly around them, their faces grave but kind. "Papa? Mama?" Charlotte asked, looking between her parents with the intuition that children possess. "Something's different." William and Kate sat down at the table with them, abandoning any pretense of a normal breakfast routine. "We need to tell you something important," Kate began, her voice gentle but clear. "Great-Granny died peacefully in her sleep early this morning." The silence that followed was profound. George, being the oldest, was the first to react, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and then a grief too large for his 10-year-old frame. "But we just saw her yesterday," Louis said, his small voice carrying bewilderment rather than sadness. He was still too young to fully grasp the permanence of death. "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes people die even when we're not ready for them to go," William explained, pulling Louis onto his lap. Charlotte was crying silently, the kind of quiet tears that spoke of deep understanding. Kate moved to sit beside her, wrapping her in a comforting embrace. "What happens now?" George asked, his practical mind trying to make sense of this new reality. "Now we remember her, we celebrate the love she gave us, and we help each other feel sad and happy at the same time," Kate said. "It's okay to feel confused. Adults feel confused about death too." They spent the morning together, letting the children ask questions and express their feelings however they needed to. Louis wanted to know if Great-Granny was cold in heaven. Charlotte worried that Great-Granny might be lonely. George asked grown-up questions about funerals and what would happen to the monarchy. William and Kate answered each question with honesty, appropriate to each child's age and understanding, never making promises they couldn't keep or offering explanations that might confuse more than comfort. By afternoon, the castle was filling with family members, staff, and officials who needed to begin the complex process of managing a royal death. But William and Kate created a buffer around their children, insisting that their need to grieve as a family came before any official duties. They decided to visit the room where their grandmother had spent her final weeks. The children were hesitant at first, but Kate explained that seeing the space might help them understand that she was truly at peace. The room was exactly as she had left it, the photo album still open on the side table, the tartan blanket folded neatly over the arm of her chair, the flowers they had picked for her still fresh in their vase. But the absence of her presence was profound, a silence that spoke volumes. It doesn't feel scary, Charlotte observed, sounding surprised. No, it doesn't, William agreed. It feels quiet, peaceful. George walked over to the window where she had loved to sit, looking out at the gardens that had brought her so much joy. She could see the flowers from here every day, he said softly. She loved watching you play in those gardens, Kate told him. Some of her happiest moments in these last weeks were watching you three discover things and explore and be curious about everything. They stayed in the room for perhaps 20 minutes, sharing memories and slowly beginning to accept that this space, which had been so full of life and love, was now a place for remembering rather than visiting. Later that evening, as the children played quietly in the castle's main hall, William and Kate found themselves back in the drawing room with several family members. The conversation was practical. Arrangements needed to be made, schedules coordinated, the complex machinery of a state funeral set in motion. But underneath the practical discussions, there was a current of genuine grief, of a family coming to terms with the loss of its matriarch. Stories were shared, funny memories, touching moments, times when she had offered exactly the right words or gesture when they were needed most. She made each of us feel like we were her favorite, Edward observed. Somehow she had enough love that we could all feel uniquely special. That's what made her such an extraordinary queen, William said. She understood that leadership isn't about being above people. It's about making people feel valued and seen. As the evening wore on, the children gradually grew quiet, the weight of the day settling over them. When bedtime came, they all wanted to sleep together, needing the comfort of family closeness. Kate and William tucked them into the large bed in the master bedroom, creating a nest of pillows and blankets where they could feel safe and surrounded by love. Will we dream about Great Granny? Louis asked sleepily. Maybe, Kate said. And if you do, remember that dreams can be a way that people we love visit us, even after they've died. I hope I dream about her teaching me to curtsy, Charlotte murmured. I hope I dream about her stories, George added. As the children finally fell asleep, William and Kate lay awake in the quiet room, listening to their breathing and processing their own grief. They had successfully navigated this first terrible day, but they knew that the real work of grieving would unfold over months and years to come. She would be proud of how we handled today, Kate whispered. She would be proud of them, William replied. Looking at their sleeping children, they're going to carry her memory forward with such grace. Outside their window, the Scottish hills stretched away into darkness, holding centuries of royal history and family stories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more difficult conversations, and the beginning of their public farewell to a beloved queen and great-grandmother. But tonight they were simply a family holding each other close, finding strength in their love and in the precious memories that no one could take away. The return to London felt surreal. The family had spent 3 more days at Balmoral, allowing the children time to process their grief in the peaceful environment their great-grandmother had loved. But now, as their car wound through the familiar streets of the capital, the reality of their public role in this farewell began to settle over them. Crowds had already begun gathering along the route to Buckingham Palace, people holding flowers and small signs, their faces reflecting a mixture of sadness and respect. William watched through the tinted windows as ordinary citizens paid their respects in the simple way that felt most natural to them. By showing up, by being present in this moment of national loss. Look at all the people, Charlotte observed, pressing her face to the window. Why are they all here? Because they loved Great Granny too, Kate explained gently. She wasn't just our family member. She belonged to all these people as well. They're sad just like we are. George, who had been quietly thoughtful during the journey, suddenly spoke up. Will we have to talk to them? William understood the weight behind his son's question. At 10 years old, George was already aware of his future role, already beginning to understand that his grief would not be entirely private. Not today, William assured him. Today we're going to focus on being a family. But someday when you're ready, sharing memories of Great Granny with people who loved her too might feel good. The palace felt different when they arrived. There was an energy of controlled activity, staff members moving purposefully through the corridors, phones ringing constantly, the machinery of state moving through its ancient protocols. But there was also a sense of reverence, as if the building itself was in mourning. Kate had arranged for the children to have a quiet space away from the main activity, understanding that they needed time to adjust to being back in London while processing their grief. She had asked for some of their favorite books and games to be waiting for them, creating a small sanctuary within the larger chaos. That afternoon brought their first formal responsibility, a brief appearance to accept condolences from close family friends and a few key government officials. William and Kate had decided that the children should participate only as much as they felt comfortable, never forcing them into situations that felt overwhelming. As they walked through the palace's formal reception rooms, Louis held tightly to Kate's hand while Charlotte stayed close to William's side. George walked slightly apart, trying to project a maturity that his parents could see was both genuine and carefully constructed. The first person to approach them was an elderly gentleman who had served in the government for decades. His eyes were genuinely moist as he expressed his condolences. "Your great-grandmother was the finest person I ever had the privilege to serve," he told the children. "She had this remarkable ability to make everyone feel important. From prime ministers to the youngest page. She made us feel important too," Charlotte said softly, fingering the locket that now hung constantly around her neck. These interactions continued throughout the afternoon, people sharing brief memories, expressing their sorrow, and offering support to the family. William and Kate watched their children navigate these conversations with a grace that was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. They were learning in real time how to carry grief publicly while maintaining their essential selves. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, William and Kate found themselves in the private sitting room where so many family conversations had taken place over the years. The room felt full of memories. Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, quiet family dinners, and countless moments of ordinary love. "How do you think they're really doing?" Kate asked, settling into the sofa beside her husband. William was quiet for a moment, considering. "Better than I expected, but I think the hardest part is still coming. Today was about accepting condolences and being surrounded by people who loved her. The funeral will be different, more formal, more public, more final." They had been carefully planning the children's involvement in the state funeral, balancing the importance of their participation with the need to protect their emotional well-being. It would be their first experience with the formal rituals of royal mourning, their first time grieving in front of the world. "I keep thinking about what she said about letting them be children," Kate said. "But they're not just children, are they? They're royal children, and that changes everything." "It does," William agreed. "But maybe being royal children means they get to show the world that it's possible to have dignity and vulnerability at the same time." She certainly did that throughout her life. The next morning brought a new challenge. The children needed to see their great-grandmother's coffin before the public viewing began, to have their own private moment of goodbye. William and Kate had debated this decision extensively. Was it too much for young minds to process? Or was it an important part of helping them understand the finality of death? They had decided to let each child choose for themselves, after explaining what the experience would be like. Westminster Hall was magnificent in its solemnity. The ancient stone walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an atmosphere of profound reverence. The coffin lay in state on a raised platform, draped in the royal standard and surrounded by an honor guard. George chose to approach first, walking slowly and deliberately toward the platform. He stood for several minutes in perfect stillness, his young face serious and contemplative. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were dry, but his expression had changed. Something had shifted in his understanding of death and dignity. Charlotte was more hesitant, but she wanted to place one of her drawings near the coffin, a picture of their great-grandmother surrounded by all the flowers they had picked together. A guard carefully accepted the drawing, understanding its significance. Louis surprised everyone by walking right up to the platform and whispering something very quietly. When Kate asked him later what he had said, he simply replied, "I told her thank you for the soldier." The wooden toy soldier was clutched in his small hand, a tangible connection to the great-grandmother who was no longer there to hug him, but whose love remained real and present. As they left Westminster Hall, William felt a profound shift in his children. They had faced something difficult and emerged with their essential selves intact, but somehow deepened. The experience hadn't diminished their childhood. If anything, it had revealed the strength and wisdom that had always been part of who they were. That evening, the family gathered in their private quarters for what Kate called remembering time. She had started this ritual the night they returned to London, understanding that active memory making would be crucial for helping the children process their grief in healthy ways. Tonight, each person shared a specific memory of their great-grandmother that made them smile. William talked about how she had once caught him feeding biscuits to the palace corgis under the table during a formal tea, and instead of scolding him, she had simply winked and slipped him an extra biscuit for himself. Kate shared the memory of their wedding day, when amidst all the ceremony and public attention, their grandmother had taken a quiet moment to tell Kate that she could see how happy William was, and that happiness in the family was more important than any protocol. George remembered how she had taught him to play chess, patiently explaining each move and never letting him win, but celebrating genuinely when he finally earned his victories through skill and thought. Charlotte talked about the locket and how wearing it made her feel connected to all the strong women in their family. History, women she would never meet but who were somehow part of who she was becoming. Louis, in the direct way of 6-year-olds, said he remembered how great-granny always smelled like flowers and how her hugs felt safe. Even when everything else felt scary or confusing, these sharing sessions were becoming sacred time for the family, moments when grief and joy could coexist naturally, when they could miss someone deeply while also celebrating the gift of having known them. As the week progressed toward the funeral, William and Kate watched their children develop their own coping strategies. George threw himself into reading, finding comfort in stories and facts that he could control and understand. Charlotte drew constantly, creating picture after picture of family memories and imagined scenes of their great-grandmother in a peaceful place surrounded by flowers and sunshine. Louis played elaborate games with his toy soldier, creating adventures where the little guard protected important people and kept them safe from harm. Each child's approach to grief was different, but all were healthy expressions of their individual personalities working to make sense of loss. William and Kate supported each approach while continuing to provide the stability and love that would help their children navigate not just this loss, but all the challenges their unique positions would bring throughout their lives. The evening before the funeral, as they tucked the children into bed, Charlotte asked a question that revealed how much she had been thinking about their new reality. "Papa, will you be king someday like great-granny was queen?" William sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, probably someday when I'm much older, and when Grandpa Charles has finished his time as king." "Will it make you sad to be king without great-granny there to help you?" The directness of the question took William's breath away. His daughter had intuited something that he had been struggling to articulate even to himself. The fear of stepping into a role without the guidance of the woman who had embodied it with such grace for so many decades. "Yes," he said honestly. "I think I will miss her wisdom and her advice. But do you know what will help me?" Charlotte shook her head, waiting, remembering everything she taught me and remembering that she believed I could do it, and having Mama and you and George and Louis to remind me what's really important. "And you'll have her journal," Charlotte added, referring to the leather-bound book their great-grandmother had given William during their final conversation. "Yes, I'll have her journal, and I'll have all the memories of watching her be queen with such kindness and strength. She showed me that being a leader means serving other people, not being more important than them." As they said their final goodnights, William and Kate felt ready for the challenges that tomorrow would bring. The funeral would be their public farewell, their chance to show the world how a family says goodbye with dignity, love, and hope for the future. Their children had taught them something important over these difficult weeks, that grief doesn't have to diminish joy, that loss can coexist with gratitude, and that love really is stronger than death. Tomorrow they would carry that lesson with them as they helped their nation say goodbye to a remarkable woman who had given her entire life to service, family, and love. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight streaming through the palace windows. William woke early, as he always did on important days, but this time the weight of the occasion settled on him differently. Today the world would watch his family say their final goodbye, and somehow they needed to balance private grief with public dignity. Kate was already up, quietly helping the children prepare for what would be the most formal and emotionally challenging day of their young lives. She had chosen their outfits carefully, appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion, but still allowing them to move and be comfortable during what would be a very long day. George stood patiently as Kate adjusted his tie, his face serious but not scared. At 10, he understood the historic nature of the day, the fact that this funeral would be remembered and talked about for generations. The responsibility of that didn't seem to overwhelm him, though. Instead, he seemed to draw strength from knowing that his behavior would honor his great-grandmother's memory. Charlotte wore a simple black dress with the locket visible at her throat. She had asked to wear it today, saying she wanted Great-Granny to be close to her heart during the goodbye. Her usual chatter was subdued, but not from fear, rather from a kind of reverent anticipation. Louis, still so young that the full meaning of the day was beyond his grasp, clutched his toy soldier and asked repeatedly when they would see Great-Granny again. Kate and William had gently reminded him that today was about saying goodbye, that Great-Granny wouldn't be coming back. But his 6-year-old mind still hoped for a different outcome. The journey to Westminster Abbey was unlike anything the children had experienced before. The streets were lined with thousands of people, all standing in respectful silence as the funeral procession made its way through London. William and Kate sat with their children in the car following the hearse, watching through the windows as ordinary citizens paid their final respects. "They really loved her," George observed quietly, seeing the flowers, the tears, and the small signs of gratitude held up by people from every walk of life. "They did," William agreed, "and she loved them back. That's what made her such a special queen. She understood that her job was to serve all these people, to be a symbol of stability and continuity for them." Inside Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere was profound. The ancient stones seemed to hold the weight of history. All the coronations and royal weddings and state funerals that had taken place within these walls over the centuries. World leaders, family members, and representatives from across the Commonwealth filled the pews, all gathered to honor a life of unprecedented service. The children walked into the Abbey with composure that amazed even their parents. George held his head high, understanding instinctively that this moment required his best behavior and his most mature self. Charlotte stayed close to Kate, her small hand finding her mother's whenever the enormity of the occasion threatened to overwhelm her. Louis walked between William and Kate, occasionally looking up at the soaring ceiling with wonder despite the solemnity of the moment. As they took their seats in the front row, William felt the full weight of finality settling over him. The ornate coffin at the front of the Abbey contained the woman who had been the anchor of his life, the steady presence who had guided him through every major decision and challenge. After today, that guidance would come only through memory and the wisdom she had shared with him over the years. The service itself was beautiful and dignified, filled with music she had loved and readings that reflected her deep faith and commitment to service. When the time came for the final hymn, William heard Charlotte's small voice singing along, her pure tone carrying clearly in the vast space. The sound of his daughter's voice raised in farewell to her great-grandmother was almost more than his composure could bear. But the moment that broke his heart completely came during the 2 minutes of silence that marked the end of the service. In that profound quiet, Louis whispered just loudly enough for the family to hear, "Goodbye, Great-Granny. Thank you for my soldier." The innocence and sincerity of those words, spoken in the silence observed by millions around the world, captured something essential about loss and love and the way children process grief with an honesty that adults often struggle to achieve. The procession to Windsor for the committal service gave the family time to decompress slightly from the formal intensity of Westminster Abbey. The children were tired but holding up well, their natural resilience helped by the rhythm and ritual of the day's events. At St. George's Chapel, the service was more intimate, attended only by close family and personal staff. Here they could grieve more privately, surrounded by people who had known and loved their matriarch not just as a queen, but as a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. As the coffin was lowered into the royal vault, William felt Charlotte slip her hand into his. Looking down, he saw that she was crying silently, finally allowing herself to fully feel the sadness she had been so bravely managing all day. "It's okay to be sad," he whispered to her, and to George and Louis as well. She would want us to be sad because that shows how much we loved her. But she would also want us to remember that love doesn't end just because someone dies. Later that evening, back at Windsor Castle, the family gathered for a quiet dinner, away from all the official events and receptions. The children were exhausted but somehow lighter, as if the formal act of saying goodbye had allowed them to begin processing their grief in a new way. "Did we do good today?" Lewis asked, his small face serious with concern. "You did perfectly," Kate assured him. "Great Granny would have been so proud of all of you. You showed everyone watching that it's possible to be sad and strong at the same time." As they prepared for bed that night, the children seemed different somehow, not older exactly, but deepened by their experience. They had participated in a moment of history, had conducted themselves with dignity that honored both their great-grandmother's memory and their own developing characters. George, getting into his pajamas, made an observation that showed his growing understanding of their unique position in the world. "People will remember today forever, won't they? Not just us, but everyone who watched." "Yes, they will," William confirmed. "And when they remember it, they'll remember how much love our family has for each other, how we can face difficult things together, and how Great Granny taught us that service and kindness are the most important things." Charlotte, now wearing her nightgown but still clutching her locket, asked, "Will the sadness go away?" Kate sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "The sadness will change, sweetheart. It won't always hurt quite so much. But missing someone you love isn't something that completely goes away, and that's okay. Missing someone means they were important to us, that they made our lives better by being in them." That night, as William and Kate finally had time alone to process their own grief, they reflected on how their children had handled the day with such grace and maturity. "She would be proud of them," Kate said quietly. "They showed the world what she taught them about duty and dignity and love." "They showed the world what you've taught them too," William replied, "about being genuine and kind and strong without losing their essential sweetness." As they settled into sleep, both parents felt that they had successfully navigated one of the most challenging days their family would ever face. The funeral was over. The goodbye had been said with proper dignity and love, and now they could begin the quieter work of grieving and healing and moving forward together. The children were asleep down the hall, each processing the day's events in their own way, but all of them surrounded by love and security. They would wake up tomorrow in a world without their beloved great-grandmother, but they would face that world with the strength she had helped build in them, the love their parents provided daily, and the knowledge that some bonds are too strong to be broken even by death. In the months and years to come, they would return to this day in memory, drawing strength from having conducted themselves with such honor during one of life's most difficult experiences. The farewell had been offered with dignity and sorrow, exactly as their great-grandmother would have wanted, and exactly as their own characters demanded. Love had been expressed fully, grief had been acknowledged honestly, and the future had been faced with hope and unity. It was, in every way, a goodbye worthy of the extraordinary woman they had lost and the remarkable family she had helped shape.